Alright guys, welcome back to the workshop. First video in the series, we're going to be getting started on the top and base part of the mantle clock. So to do this, first of all we're going to be learning some pretty basic skills, just using a tenon saw for cutting the pieces to length, right? And then after that we're going to get started on using a machine you guys wouldn't have used yet, called the table router, or if you don't have a table router we can just use a regular router. Alright, so before we get started, a few things we're going to need to know. Basically, for most of the things when we get started on all the components on this project, there's three main tools you're going to need for basically to get started on everything, right? So that's going to be a pencil, need a nice sharp pencil, rule, steel rule, 300mm, that'll do, and a tri-square, and that'll basically help us get started. Okay, so guys, make sure you've got your set of drawings with you. In this set of drawings you've got basically everything you need for every part. It's got all the dimensions you're going to need, so make sure you're referencing this throughout. What we're making here is, we need to make this piece of timber here, right? Your teacher's going to give you a long length, right? Might not be exactly what you need, might be a bit longer, but what we need to get out of that is two pieces. So this times 2, your timber's going to be 140 wide and 19mm thick, right? 140 wide, 19mm thick. You're going to need to cut two pieces at 400mm long, okay? So to do that, your teacher's going to give you a piece of timber, going to look like this, right? Pretty similar to this, piece of radiata pine, 140mm wide, 19mm thick, okay? First thing when you get a piece of timber like this, right? We don't know that this edge here is square, right? And by square, I mean from here to here is 90 degrees. Okay? We're not sure if that's going to be 90 degrees or not. So, the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that it's 90 degrees. Because it could come from the mill, could be a bit crooked, could have been cut at a bit of an angle, we're not sure, right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go with our tri-square. Just as close as we can to that line, we're going to use a tri-square to square a line right down the edge, okay? And we can sand to that later. Then the next thing we're going to do is, from that line, you're going to use your rule to measure 400mm past that, okay? So 400mm, square a line, okay? So now we know that between that line there and that line there is exactly 400mm, right? So we don't want to just go with the tenon saw and cut straight on that line. The reason being is the tenon saw, when you make a cut, it's going to leave a cut width of about 1.5mm, maybe a little bit over, and that means if we measure our next 400mm piece off that line, the next piece is going to be 1.5 mm short. And if we were to do another one, it would be 3mm short, and another one, it would be 4.5mm short, so on and so forth, okay? So what we're going to do is, and this is what you're going to need to do for every piece that you make, is called doing train tracks, or footy posts, or you can call them what you want, just don't call them late for dinner. Basically what we're going to do is square another line next to it at a distance of 6mm, okay? 6mm gives you a good gap where you can cut right in between those two lines with the tenon saw, right? And then you can go to the disc sander later, sand right down to the line, okay? So, we know from this line here to there is 400, right? Next thing you got to do is, from that second line, we want to measure another, you guessed it, 400mm, right? And another set of train tracks, okay? So then, the only cuts we're going to make, we're going to be making two cuts, one in between these two train tracks, one in between those two train tracks, right? Then we'll have two pieces at 400mm, we can take them to the disc sander, sand them down to the lines, and they should be perfectly identical, right? Let's go over to the tools and see how we're going to mark those out. Alright, so I'm over at the workbench now, I've got my piece of timber, pencil, rule, tri-square, right? That's all we're going to need to mark this out so far, right? Pretty simple stuff. Alright, so now, a couple of rules with the tri-square, right? The two, I guess you could say, components of the tri-square. We have here, this long steel part, it's called the blade, right? And then this part here is called the stock, right? Stock, blade. Now, super important when we're marking out with a tri-square that the stock, right, this part here, the stock stays right up against your piece of timber, okay? When we're marking, you need to make sure that is right up against the edge, okay? So if you catch your mate and they're trying to mark it out and they've got the tri-square like this and the stock isn't up against the edge, right? If there's a gap there, go and give them a quick clip behind the ear, say, "Oi mate, get your stock up against the edge, will ya?" I'll show you how it works up close. Really important in this, make sure you've got a sharp pencil. So many kids getting around with blunt pencils that have been rolling around in their backpack for God knows how long. They get blunt, they're all chewed up. Make sure you've got a sharpener in your room somewhere. Keep it nice and sharp. You'll get nice crisp lines. Otherwise, if you've got a blunt pencil, your pencil lines are going to be a lot thicker. Your work's not going to be very accurate, okay? So, really important, sharp pencil. Now, I'll bring you down here so you can see what we're working on. Okay, so here we are with our piece of timber. Like I was saying earlier at the whiteboard, we need to make sure that our edge here is perfectly 90 degrees, right? If we were to just use that edge and it wasn't 90 degrees, we're going to run into all sorts of problems later. So we need to make sure we check that. Now, with the tri-square, again, make sure the stock is up against your edge of your timber, right? It takes a little bit of getting used to do, but you're going to want to practice sort of having 3 or 4 of your fingers on the stock and then 1 resting on the blade or 2 resting on the blade, and you can sort of get used to this motion, right? Of just having it resting against, sliding it back and forth, so it's nice and easy to make square marks, right? So we're going to check here. Luckily, the bloke who was working at the mill has done a good job. He's given us a nice 90-degree corner, as you can see there, right? So, but let's just say he hasn't. Let's say it's a little bit crooked. What we would do in that case is we would bring the tri-square about there, nice sharp pencil, and we would just strike a line across the end there, okay? And that line is what we're going to reference when we're putting our measurements in. Like I said earlier, we need to make a piece 400 millimeters past that line. So what we're going to do is slide the rule right up, so 0 is resting on that pencil line, okay? Now, problem, our rule is not 400 millimeters long. It only goes to 300, as you can see here. So what we're going to need to do is make a little mark at 300. Got to do some quick maths. 300, how do we get to 400? Add an extra 100 millimeters, right? 100 millimeters there. Now, I'll slide this across so we can see. So 300 to 100 equals 400. Then remember we were talking about the train tracks, right? So while we're here, while we're at 100, it's easy to just add an extra 6 millimeters by making a mark at 106. Okay, so we can see there, we've got 2 marks. That's going to be our train tracks. So, same as before, we need to use our tri-square, right? We're going to make sure that the stock is right up against the edge. Then, what I like to do is, I like to get my pencil, press it down right on that line that I've made, and then slowly slide the tri-square up to it until it just touches. Then I can take it off, hold the tri-square in position, and strike my line like that. Okay? Then what I'm going to do is put my pencil on the next line, slide it across, make sure my stock is right up against the edge of the timber, and strike my next line. Okay? So we can see there, we've got our train tracks. Okay? Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to flip the piece of timber on its edge like that, so we can put the tri-square up against on the edge like this, and we can actually strike these lines down the edges. Now this is a little bit tricky. It's going to take some getting used to because you're not used to handling a tri-square yet. But see how I've done that? I've got my 2 lines along the face, and I've got my 2 lines down the edge. We're going to want to do that on both edges. Okay? Like that, and oops, like that. Okay, stock was against the edge the whole time. We can see that we've got train tracks all the way around. Now, these ones we've just done on the edge aren't super necessary for getting started, but they're going to come in handy later to make sure that we're cutting straight down that line. Okay, so next thing we need to do is mark out our next piece. You guessed it, we'll need the pencil and the rule. We're going to slide our workpiece across. We're going to line the rule up with the second line on the train tracks. Make a quick little mark at 300. Quick maths. 300 plus 100 is 400. Right? And then another 6 millimeters for your train tracks. Okay? So, same deal. Tri-square. Check your mate. Make sure they're putting the stock right up against the edge. Pencil on the line. Square it across. Pencil on your line. Square it across. Okay? And then, can't finish without doing it down the edges as well. Just like that and just like that. Same deal on the other side. Just like that and that. Okay? So, now we've got our piece of timber. It's all marked out. You can see we've got our line squared there. We've got our train tracks squared down the edge, both sides. Squared down the edge, both sides, right? So we know that piece here and that piece here, 400 millimeters. Now, let's go learn how to cut. Next 2 tools we're going to need are a bench hook and tri-square, right? Every workshop's going to have a set of these. Tenon saws, bench hooks. Now, let's go learn how to use them. Okay, so back at the workbench, we've got the two tools we need to cut. We've got our bench hook and tenon saw, okay? So these bench hooks are always designed to work for you, whether it doesn't matter if you're a left-hander or a right-hander, okay? So you want to look at the bench hook, and we see we've got a block here. If you're a right-hander, you want to have the gap, where there's a gap there and probably a lot of saw marks on your right-hand side. If you're a left-hander, you want to have the opposite. So the gap here is on your left-hand side, right? So all you're going to do is come to your vise, wind it open, put it the right way up. So whether you're a left-hander or a right-hander, clamp it up nice and tight. Okay? So next thing you're going to do is bring your piece of timber across, and we're going to want to push it right up against this part of the bench hook. Now, you might notice one problem. See how my piece of timber is a bit wobbly, like that? The little trick is, you can go over to your scrap bin. Every workshop should have a scrap bin. Just grab a piece of scrap 19mm, doesn't matter what size, and what you can do is just put it underneath on the other side of the bench, and that is going to hold it steady, right? So that wobble's now gone, okay? Just makes your life a little bit easier. Okay, so now what we're doing here is we're looking at the train tracks, right? So to start our cut, what we want to do is we want to bring the train tracks just as close to the edge of this block on the bench hook as possible, right? Now, really important when we're using the tenon saw is we hold it in what we call pistol grip. That means we've got our index finger pointing out that way, and on the other side holding like this, right? Kind of like you're shooting a gun, like that, right? Another really important thing when we're cutting is the way we're standing, okay? The way we're standing is super important, okay? So you kind of want to stand like you're about to run a race. So if you are right-handed, you want to put your left foot forward, right foot back. I see so many kids in the workshop, they come and they just stand in front of the bench like this, try and cut like that, and they never get anywhere. They spend the whole lesson cutting. But if you want to cut really quick and really well, you want to really focus on your stance. Now, make sure I've got my glasses on before I do anything, safety first. So, left foot forward, right foot back. What you're going to do is use your left hand, press it up against the bench hook, right? You're going to want to press it there so it can't move. Then, as you can see here, I'm resting my thumb, right against the edge of that blade. I can sort of rub it against the teeth there, nothing's going to happen. They are sharp, but here it's not really going to make a difference to us, or it's not going to hurt us. What I'm going to do is put the tenon saw right in between those two lines, okay? And I'm just going to drag back towards me, right? And what I've just made there is called a saw kerf, or it's the start of my saw kerf, right? K-E-R-F, kerf, right? What I want to do is I want to do that on both sides. So I just use my finger to make sure the saw is right in between the train tracks, and I drag back towards me, okay? You can do it 2 or 3 times on both sides. Make sure you're periodically blowing the dust away as well. Any dust that covers up the lines is going to make them harder to see, so you're going to want to get rid of them. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, got my running stance on, pressing it up against the bench hook. I'm going to put my saw back in that curve, and slowly, I'm just going to start sawing back and forth like this. And I'm going to start leaning it towards the other side. And you can see, I'm starting to develop a line that's working its way to the middle, right? Slowly keep on leaning it forward. Get to about halfway, put it on the opposite side, and then start leaning it back. Right? And the goal here is to get that curve and that curve to meet, to make one continuous saw curve along the length of your train track. Right? Okay, blow the dust away, and we can see there, we've got one perfect saw curve right in between the train tracks. You might have made a few mistakes and the saw might have slipped a little bit and made some dents here and there, but that's okay, we can fix those later. Okay, so once we've got that, we want to be looking at the train tracks that are down the edges, okay? We want to make sure that that saw curve there stays straight all the way down. Because when you're learning to use a tenon saw, you might accidentally cut at a little bit of an angle this way or a little bit of an angle that way. So that's why we put the train tracks down the edges, just so we can keep an eye, make sure we're cutting straight. Okay? So we're going to just continue cutting. One other trick I'll teach you guys. In most workshops, right? The kids get in here and they'll stand here and they'll just cut like this. This is what the Year 7 kids do. They go just like this. They stand there and they're only using this sort of middle set of teeth, right? So these teeth in the middle right here, about here to here, they get blunt the quickest and they're not really doing the best job at cutting that they could be doing, okay? So what we want to do is we want to make sure we're using the full length of the saw, right? We want to use from end to end as we're cutting, because we've got the really sharp teeth here on either end, right? And it's just going to go a lot quicker if we're using all these teeth as opposed to just using the teeth in the middle. So pay attention, from front to back, all the way. Okay, so we periodically check and we make sure that we're still in between the train tracks on both sides. Getting a little bit crooked there, but it doesn't look like we're going to hit that line, which is okay. We blow the dust away, keep on cutting. Now, you can see here, I'm right nearly at the bottom, right? I'm nearly there. What a lot of kids get tempted to do is to snap their piece of wood at the end there. You're going to want to do your best, once you get to the end of your cut, like we are here, not to snap your wood. You want to avoid that temptation to just take it and snap it to finish it off. Really make sure you're using the tenon saw to finish off your cut, right? Otherwise the grain or the fibres of the timber are going to snap and you're going to end up with some chunks missing out of the end of your piece, and it's just not going to look very good, okay? So we're nearly there. We'll only take a few more strokes to finish it. Ta-da! Look at that. Okay, so we can see here, we have cut right next to the line. We've got our train tracks there, train tracks there. Now that we've finished cutting this piece, we've got one more to go, because remember we need 2 pieces at 400. So I'm going to zoom through this, finish this cut off, and then I'll meet you over the disc sander. Okay, there we go. Now, I'll come and show you. Got my 2 pieces cut. Can still see the lines on both sides. Now, take you over to the disc sander and I'll show you how we can sand those down to the line. Okay, so now we're over here at the disc sander, guys. Sorry you can't see the top of my head, but I couldn't fit my big head and the disc sander and the floor here all in frame. The reason I wanted to get the floor in frame, as you can see here, those yellow lines, right? There's a reason those are there. Those are our yellow safety lines, right? The reason we have those here is because in those lines, there's only to be one person in there at a time when the disc sander is in operation, right? So if you're standing in here using the disc sander, I don't want to see any of your mates coming in here, looking over your shoulder, trying to see what you're doing, right? Make sure your mates stand back around the yellow line. Next thing that's dangerous on the disc sander is the actual disc itself, right? This thing here is probably, most likely you've got on yours about an 80-60 grit sanding pad, right? So that's going to be spinning at really fast speeds and can easily take your fingers off, so you want to really be careful. Now, if I turn the disc sander on, it's going to start spinning most of the time in a clockwise direction, so it's going to be spinning that way. Most disc sanders will have an arrow on the top here that'll tell you the direction it's spinning, or if you're unsure, just turn it on quickly and you'll be able to see which way it spins. The reason I'm letting you guys know why it's important to know which way it spins is, if I've got my piece of timber and I want to sand it down to that pencil line that we've got there, right? If it's spinning this way, right, so it's spinning clockwise, if I put my piece of timber on the left-hand side, because on this side of the disc sander, the sandpaper is coming in an upwards direction, it's going to want to flick it out of my hands, flick it up back in your face, flick it, it's going to go and hit your mate or something like that. Don't want to do that. We want to make sure it is on the correct side where the disc is going downwards, right? It's going to be pressing down into your piece of timber like that. That's the safest way to use a disc sander. Make sure we use it on the direction that it's coming down. One more thing you can probably see, coming off the back of the disc sander here, right? That is our dust extraction pipe, right? That's there for a reason. We need to make sure that the dust extractor is on. I haven't turned it on just yet because it's quite loud and you might not be able to hear me, but I'll turn it on when we're actually using the machine. The reason we need to have the dust extractor on is because it is going to be creating quite a lot of dust as we sand down to that pencil line, okay? And that is dust that we don't want to be clogging up our glasses so we don't see. Your mate over there who's got asthma is probably not going to like it very much if you're creating a lot of dust around him. And if we have the dust extractor on, it's a lot less mess for you to sweep up later, okay? So keep that in mind. I've got you down here trying to give you the best view that I can of what we're trying to do. Hopefully you can still see that pencil line there, because that is the line we're going to be wanting to sand to. Now, when a lot of people use the disc sander, a lot of students, they want to try and take the material off away as quick as they can, so they try and do stuff like this, where they're sanding the edges and moving it side to side like that. But what's going to happen is you're going to end up getting sort of rounded corners over here and here, right? And you're not going to have a square edge. To effectively use a disc sander, we want to be holding it with two hands like this. If you can, put your thumbs at the back, but you can hold it like this if you want. Just make sure you're pressing it right down on this bed here, right? We want to be pressing it square up against the disc sander, and we want to slowly, if we can, just slide from side to side, slowly like that, right? You don't want to just jam it in against it, because you're going to start burning it. You end up with lines like that on your disc sander, and you'll end up with nasty burns on the edge of your timber that you don't want, because they're really hard to sand off later. We just want to nice and gently go slowly side to side like that, and get rid of that. I'll show you how that works. Okay, now, you should be able to see there that I've just basically cut that pencil line in half. That means I know I've gone to the correct way. And see, because I've gone really slow, I haven't burnt any of the timber on the edge here. I can still see the perfect colour of the radiata pine there. So that edge is now done. What I need to do now is turn it over, sand my other edge, do the same on my next piece, and then I'll be done. Back over the work. Jeez, bloody man. Turn that bloody dust extractor off. Alright. So, sorry. What we need to do now is, once we've sanded all our edges on both pieces, is we want to quickly check with the tri-square here to make sure that we've actually sanded this edge perfectly square. Okay? So to do that, what you want to do is, I've got my window just over here. You're going to want to take the tri-square and your piece of timber, put the tri-square, put the stock right up against the edge, and slowly slide it down till it touches your edge there, okay? And our goal there is to make sure that we can't see any light in between the bottom of the blade and the top edge of our piece of timber, okay? So we slide it down. If I can see some light in between there, that means there is a slight angle either way on the edge, and you might need to fix that up on the disc sander. So check all your pieces, but if you've sanded perfectly to that line, we shouldn't have a problem. So I can see there, can't see any light through there, that's good. I don't know if you guys can see that. So, check that on all your pieces, make sure you got nice square edges. Now, I've just got a bit of scrap wood to show you guys a quick example of how to fix it if we put our tri-square on and see that gap there? Right? So we can see that we do not have a square edge on that end of our piece of timber. Okay, so we need to fix that. So, I'll show you how we do that. I've got my piece of timber here, just a bit of scrap for an example, and you can see that is not square. See how the tri-square is touching the corner here, but on the other edge there's heaps of timber sticking up, right? So what you need to do is, we need to figure out the direction that this is sloping, right? We need to figure out if it's sloping that way or that way, okay? You can do that by just putting the tri-square up like we had it before, and seeing which edge, when you slide it up, touches the tri-square first, or which part of the tri-square touches the end of your timber first, right? So we know that it slopes down this way. So all we're going to do is, we're going to take the tri-square, make sure the stock is up against the edge of your piece of timber, slide it up till it touches that corner, and strike a new pencil line, okay? So essentially what you've created there is a really long skinny triangle that's wider at this edge and comes to a point over here, okay? So that is all waste that we need to get rid of if we want to have a square piece of timber. To fix that, back over the disc sander, sand it up, try and sand it to the bloody line this time, right? We don't want to be sanding it crooked every time. We need to make sure we get that nice and square. So nice and slowly on the disc sander, take your time. If you're struggling, get one of your mates who's done it well to help you out, give you some advice, okay? So now that we're back from the disc sander, we've got our two pieces, perfectly 400 millimeters, square ends, sanded to the line. You will notice on the back edge where you've gone on the disc sander, don't know if you can see it, you end up with some fluffy stuff right here, okay? That comes in, that's going to be a little bit of a problem later. It just gets in the way when we want to start marking out stuff. So all you're going to need to do is grab a piece of sandpaper right from the sandpaper bin. Doesn't need to be a freshie, you don't need a good piece, just a bit of scrap, doesn't matter if it's all damaged. All you're going to do is wrap it around your cork block, right? Nice and easy, we're not trying to take off too much material, just getting rid of that fluffy edge, just like that. Okay, if you do it too much, you'll end up with a chamfer on the edge of your timber. We don't want that, okay? All right, so if you get your drawings out and have a look, we can see that for our top and base piece, drawing number 3, we're very close to being done, right? We've got our piece cut, it's 140 millimeters wide, it's 19 millimeters thick, and it's 400 millimeters long. Only thing left to do is, we can see we've got a decorative edge on 3 of the edges of the clock, right? We don't have it on the back edge because that back edge is going to be going up against the wall and we want it to be flat, okay? So we only need to put it on 3 of the edges, and that's indicated in the drawing there. 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to show you how to put those decorative edges on the router. We're over at the table router now. So not every workshop's going to have one of these table routers. You might just have a regular handheld router. So I'm going to show you first how to do it on this. If you've got one, great. If not, I'll show you how to set it up with the handheld router a little bit later. Okay. So a few things we need to know before we use this machine. Same drill. We've got yellow lines on the ground, one person at a time. This one's a little bit different because you guys, in year 9, you aren't really allowed to use this machine unless you have direct teacher supervision. Your teacher is going to need to be standing right next to you, supervising you as you do it, which is good because this can be a little bit of a scary machine to use at first because it's quite loud, it's taken off a lot of material, and there's a really sharp bit spinning around there. So we're going to walk through how to use that safely now. First thing we're going to need, you're going to need your 2 pieces of timber that we're going to be dressing the edges of. We're going to need our safety glasses, right? Always have those on. And we're going to need earmuffs because the thing is quite loud. One important thing when using table router is the direction in which you actually feed the timber through, right? Because if we think about it, I'll show you over here. This is what it looks like from the top. Now, we've got our cutting bit here. This is our router bit. They look just like this, okay? I'll show you those. Basically what we've got is, we've got a few components. We've got the shank here, which is the part that the router actually holds onto. We've got the cutting edges. So the cutting edge will have different profiles depending on what kind of edge you're looking for. And we've got a bearing up the top, right? This bearing will spin around. And that's what we actually want the edge of our timber running against, right? We want our timber to be running against this bearing the whole time because that's going to allow us to take a full cut. I've already got a piece set up in the router here, as you can see. The router bit is going to be spinning when it's upside down in a anti-clockwise direction, right? If you have it right way up, it'll be clockwise, but upside down, anti-clockwise. Now, because it's spinning this way, that means if I were to put my piece of timber here and run it through this way, because it's spinning like this, what it's going to want to do is it's going to want to grab the piece of timber as it hits it and spit it out that way. We want to be going against the direction that it's spinning, right? So because it's spinning this way, we're going to want to feed it in that way. That way, when we're pressing it, the force is coming towards us and we can push against it, as opposed to going this way and us sort of losing control of it and it's spitting it out this way. Okay? So, when we're on a table router, we put it in on the right and we move it towards the left. Okay? It's a little bit different when we're doing it with the handheld router, but for here, we put it in on the right, up against the fence, and we move it to the left. Before we get started, we need to actually decide which edges we're going to feed through the router first, right? Are we going to do the short edges or the long edges? Now, to think about that, I like to sort of think of timber as like a bundle of drinking straws, right? That's the way I like to think about it, because timber actually has a grain direction, and the grain direction runs the way that these long lines run, okay? So if we look at timber under a microscope, I'll show you an image here, you can sort of think of the grain structure as like a bundle of straws, just like this. So in this case, the bundle of straws would be running this way. So if I were to go with the router along this edge, along the end grain here, along the end of the grain, what's going to happen is when I get to the very edge, see there? Get to the edge and then it bursts out that way, right? It's going to tear out the grain and you're going to lose a chunk off the back edge of your timber. Whereas if first I do it along the length of the grain, go along this way, so if I'm thinking it as a pile of straws, I go along that way, I actually can't make anything tear out because that's the way the grain's running, okay? So that's a good way to think of it. Think of it like a bundle of straws. Make sure we do our long edges first where it can't tear out, then we do our short edges. Now, in this case, if we do our long edge like this, we can then come on, do our short edge like this, and because we've already treated this corner on our first pass, that edge won't blow out. But when we do the opposite side over here, when we come out this way, that can still blow out. So there is one way to avoid that, which I'll show you now. Roll of masking tape, right? Not a whole roll. Basically, all you need to do is rip off a piece, yay long, not super important, about that long. And what I like to do is just put it on the edge of the timber like this, right? Push it over the edge like that, and then just press the edges of the tape down over like that, okay? That basically just creates a little bit of support for it, and it's gonna help support it to stop the chance of it blowing out, okay? So, we're gonna do our long edge like this. We're gonna do this short edge where it can't blow out because we've already done this edge, and then we're gonna come through, do this final edge, and hopefully this bit of tape here will stop that from blowing out. We'll chuck our PPE on, glasses, earmuffs, and we're ready to go. We'll have a look down from the top so you can see how this beast works. Alright, so we've got our piece of timber, we've got the router set up perfectly, your teacher will have that set up perfectly, ready to go, fence is all set up. These machines do have an emergency stop switch, so that emergency stop switch generally needs to be turned to unlock it, then we can press the green button to turn it on, right? Now make sure your knees are somewhere where if something goes wrong you can easily move your knee forward and press that button just like that to turn it off in case something goes wrong, right? So, we're going to turn it on. Might be a bit loud, this thing does get bloody loud, so hopefully you can hear me. We push it up against the fence like that, and we slowly start feeding it in. We just go at about that speed, all the way across. Right, blow the dust away. Okay, so I've just finished that cut. Really important, there often will be a lot of dust piling up around here. Do not get tempted to sweep it away with your hand, because if that bit there is still spinning and your finger touches it, see you later fingernail, all right? Got to be really careful. Now we can see here that I have a decorative edge, just like that, all the way along. And that turned out really nice, okay? So that's good. Next thing we're going to do is, we're going to do it along this end grain edge. Right, do it along here. So we make sure the face that we want up is down on the table, and exact same thing. So, you can see there, we haven't got any tear out there, which is good, and we've got a decorative edge the whole way along. Now, you may notice that you might need to actually do 2 passes, 3 passes to make sure you take a full cut the whole way along. Sometimes you might not get a full cut on your first go. So all you need to do is put it back against, go again, maybe even need to go one more time to make sure you've got a nice clean edge the whole way along. Last one is the one that's got the tape on it. So make sure your tape's pressed down really firm, and then we'll go on that one. Now, the tape, as you can see, tends to get chewed up a little bit. That's why you don't want to use too much tape. But we can see if we remove all that, we've got a little bit of dust there, but it didn't have a big tear out. It didn't take a big chunk out of there, right? That's why we use the tape. 3 edges done. 1, 2, 3. If you have a table router, do your second piece, do your 3 edges on that one. But if not, let's go learn how to use a handheld router. Okay, so we're back at the workbench. This time, we got this big bastard here, right? This is called a handheld router, right? You can see it's got the decorative edge bit on it there, right? Basically, what the table router we were using is basically just one of these mounted on the underside of a table with that bit sticking out. But we use that one where the router's upside down. For this, to use it properly, we need to turn it right way up, and we've got 2 handles, we can hold it like that. We're over the workbench now. We've got our piece that we need to put the 3 edges on. 1, 2, 3. We need to actually secure this to the workbench so that we can work with it. Because that router, it's going to be putting a lot of force out and it's going to be vibrating a lot. So we need to make sure this piece is really secure down to this workbench, okay? So to do that, what a lot of people like to do is use these quick clamps. You guys probably have these in your workshop. Squeeze them like that, they come together. These things are pretty good to get you out of a pinch. They do work quite well, but they really aren't as strong as the old school G-clamp, right? Wherever you can, use these. I swear they're about 10 times stronger. You can get these a whole lot tighter than you can these things, right? So most people would just go like this, clamp that on there, right? Clamp the other one on the other side, like this, right on the corners, right? But I can still get quite a bit of movement out of that, right? Because these things, even though I've tightened them about as tight as I can, they're still not holding on that well. That's why the G-clamp is kind of, in my opinion, superior to these things. And Because especially because that router is going to be vibrating a lot, these things might end up sort of coming loose, falling off, and we don't want that happening mid-operation. I'm going to take these off, put the G-clamps on. We've got the router, make sure we plug it in. We want to keep the cord somewhere where it's away from the cutting bit. So we plug it in here, make sure it's on. And I can see that because I've got the router over here, the cord is not going to get in the way as I move across, right? Which is exactly what I want. Now, when we were using the table router, we worked from right to left. But because we're upside down now, and the bit is going to be spinning clockwise, we're going to be working from left to right, just like that. Making sure at all times, we're holding the router two hands, right? And this one, because it's quite a big router, it actually has quite a bit of kick when you turn it on. So the switch is just here, and you're going to flick it with your finger like that, right? But when it turns on, it gives you a bit of a kick like that. So make sure you're holding on tight, because you don't want to drop it as you're working. Make sure we've got all our PP on, loose clothes are restrained, hair's tied back, glasses, earmuffs, because it's really loud. And then all we're going to do is, as we operate it, we're going to turn it on, so flick it on, bring it down so that the bottom of the router is resting on your material, and you're slowly just going to look over the top, making sure that the router is sitting flat. You don't want to be leaning too far back or too far forward like that. Make sure it's sitting perfectly flat. And I like to look over the top like this so I can actually see down in here and see the bearing and make sure it's running across the edge of the timber. So we're going to turn it on. Put it down, and then all done. I've done that first edge. Now, same as I did over on the table router, I need to do my end grain edges now, these short edges, right? So I've got to make sure one edge is taped up, the tape that could blow out the grain at the back. Make sure that's taped up. The other one should be fine to just go straight through, okay? So all we're going to do is take our G-clamps off, like this. Right? And we're going to move it to a spot where it's hanging over and we can work in this area. So we're going to put one clamp on over here, like that, the other clamp on over here. So that's nice and solid now. I can work on that just like this. Make sure this edge is taped up for when, so the grain doesn't blow out. Now, if there is a bit too much cord hanging around, just try and wrap it over your neck like that, and that'll keep it out of the way, and it'll stop the cord from ever getting in contact with the router bit down the bottom. So flick it on. Turn it off. Very good. Okay, then exact same thing on the other side, and we're done. Now also, that was pretty loud, and I didn't have my earmuffs on, so learn from my mistakes. Make sure you put your earmuffs on. Now, doing the second edge, same thing. Working from left to right. Wrap the cord around your neck. Make sure you got earmuffs on. Okay, and we're done. So we can see here, we've got routed edge, 1, 2, 3 sides, but again, we've got some sort of fluffy little bits of timber hanging off here. We're gonna need to sand those off. So in the next video, I'll show you how to sand those. Super good habit to get into before you start sanding your piece is just quickly where you're gonna be sanding on the bench. Just check it with your hand, really lightly, make sure there's no nails or anything like that on the bench. Sometimes you get the year 7s in there, put nails in the bench. So just check on that, because the last thing you want is to sand up your piece really nice, put it down, move it, and then have a big scratch on the back or front of your piece, right? Because that's really hard to get out. Basically the things we need are cork block, and then the 3 bits of sandpaper that we're going to use, 80, 120, and 180, okay? So basically when we're sanding, remember earlier we talked about the grain direction, right? So in this piece of timber we can follow the lines and it runs this way. So you're going to hear something a lot in woodwork, and that's talking about sanding across the grain, which is something that you never want to do, right? That means sanding in this direction, going across those lines. Basically what that does is it puts big deep grooves in there that are really visible and they look quite ugly, and they're really hard to get out. So whenever we're sanding, we always want to sand with the grain. So we're going in the direction that these lines go. A lot of people will just sort of sit up on the bench like this with a cork block, sandpaper, sit there and sand like that, and they don't get much done, right? Because you haven't really got much force behind the cork block and sandpaper to actually remove any material and really do anything. So what you really want to do is have your piece of timber down on the bench, cork block in one hand, sandpaper in the other, and put it down like this. So you can kind of lean over it and put a bit of weight onto it, right? And we want to sand that whole surface with 80 grit. Right. Get rid of any pencil lines, any dark colours or smudges that might be on the timber. And then we really carefully want to use the, just use right on the corner of the cork block to get right into these grooves to sand them a little bit. So kind of what we're doing is really carefully going in here just to get that detail nice and clean, just to clean that edge up, right? So nice and gently along there. Clean that all up. And then same here. It's a little bit tricky here because you kind of have to go across the grain to get in that, but we can fix that up later. We just want to nice and lightly get rid of any fluffy stuff and clean that up, right? Same on both ends, both pieces, and once we've done that, I think we're done. So, we'll work next with 120. Final one, 180 grit sandpaper. This is where you really want to take your time with the 180, right at the end, right? Take a lot of time with this one because you get a really nice finish with it. Really carefully try and get into those grooves, the router grooves. Polish that up. And you can even also sand the edges. Right? This is a step a lot of people skip and a lot of people really rush on, and it really affects the overall quality of their finished product. But if you take your time with sanding, it's one of the most important things because it's one of the first things people notice when they actually have a good closer look at your job, right? They're going to look, and if they can see scratches and pencil marks all over it, they're not going to be very impressed, right? So you want to really take your time with the sanding. Sand everywhere perfectly, okay? Now, should have two of these. Perfectly sanded up. 80, 120, 180, all around. You should be able to feel it nice and smooth everywhere. What you're going to do now is, just on the back corner here, right, with a pencil, write your initials really small just so you don't have too much sanding to do later. Just so you know it's yours. Put it in your bag and then leave it till the end, and we'll pick it up again when we're doing our final assembly, right? So that is your top and base pieces done for now. Good work, team. See you in the next video.